Hello everyone, and welcome to the week, focusing on the jungle chapters 5 through 10 and then chapters 15 through 20. So in this welcoming discussion video / presentation, I'm going to go through a few things that we can continue to discuss in class, particularly this aspect of little things adding up, whether it be the advertisements, the ailments, the debts and the payments on the house. Little things add up in this novel. However, it's not always clear what message or what idea we can take away from these little things adding up. And so I'm going to present a few, but then encourage you all to look for other places to count what matters or what sort of adds up so that it becomes a larger problem for Jurgis, Ona, and the rest of the family. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about are two significant moments relating back to gender and then race. The first being womb trouble, the particular trouble of women who are pregnant in Packingtown, and then a comparison to chattel slavery that's used to help us think further about the pressures, again, that women experience, whether it be having a child or being vulnerable to sexual assault. And of course, over the course of the novel, there are other moments that relate back to slavery that we'll also bring up in our class discussion. All right, so let's get to it. Okay, so to start out with talking about little things that add up, I want to bring up advertisements. Now, the first sort of encounter we have with all these advertisements are related back to the house itself. The house is the premise of this family's dream, the hopes for their financial foundation, and then, of course, as we eventually learn, the house becomes the source of many of their troubles because of the little details that add up in the lease. To make a house a home, they need different furnishings, and the advice for what they need to add to their house is everywhere. A person who had such a task before him would not need to look very far in Packingtown. He only had to walk up the avenue and read the signs, or get into a streetcar to obtain full information as to pretty much everything a human creature could need. It was quite touching, the zeal of people, to see that his health and happiness was provided for. Did a person wish to smoke? There was a little discourse about cigars, showing him exactly why the Thomas Jefferson 5-cent Perfecto was the only cigar worthy of the name. Had he, on the other hand, smoked too much? Here was a remedy for the smoking habit. 25 doses for a quarter, and a cure absolutely guaranteed in 10 doses. So in this description, as we read it, we're sort of capturing the voice almost of the city itself as it's expressed through these advertisements. Again, everywhere you look, there is something for you to have, something easily to be bought, something made by a larger manufacturer. Larger manufacturing means people are not really trading goods in a market as much as they're buying goods from stores. This is part of modernity. We have ads everywhere telling us what we can buy. They're mass-produced, but then also there's this element of how good is the product itself? What is its quality? Is it really the best thing for me? As we consider Jurgis and Ona and the rest of the family as they're overwhelmed by the city, we also might find these moments really relatable. How do you know which item to buy? How do you know you got the best price? Don't you just assume based on its sort of proximity and the fact that everyone else buys it, that's the best item? These are things for us to consider. And what kind of tone, affect, feeling, again here, is being evoked? Is this supposed to be humorous? And if so, why? These ads start to get a little more problematic when we start to think about ads telling us what we should buy to take care of our bodies. Is your wife pale? Don't be a chump. This is what you need to get her. The signs are everywhere. The pictures are everywhere. And if you can't afford a doctor, surely the over-the-counter medicine is your best option. And of course, as I pose this is a rhetorical question. This is sort of embodying the mindset of Jurgis and his family as they're trying their best to take care of themselves for the cheapest cost. Okay, so here we have a few ads. One for a piece of furniture that has time-saving specialties, another for a soothing syrup, Again, these would have been all over the place. Bright, eye-catching, giving you this sense of this is what you need to complete your home. Such ads are also pretty relatable for us today. Whether it's back pain, whether it's sinuses, there's medicine everywhere at this point in time, regulated by the FDA, an institution that evolved out of the very instances and out of the very text that we're reading right now. But nevertheless, we still have these moments of trying to figure out, is the ad really telling me the best thing I need? How do I find the advice? How do I figure it out? Especially if something like a doctor is not readily available. So now I pose the question, why take the time to tell us about the ads that bombard the family? What happens when we read those different descriptions in excess? You might even focus on the very particular types of items being sold or being advertised. In other words, what do the ads tell us about class, health, or other aspects of everyday life? This is one of the questions that I would like you to answer, particularly by drawing on the text itself, whether it's the passages that I've presented here or others that you've read. And of course, if the ads for medicine are building up, that is also a response to the environment and the circumstances of the city. In Packingtown, people have ailments, and they add up quite quickly. So for example, in chapter 5, there's the moment where Deda Antanas, Jurgis's father, decides, we need to keep this house, I need to find a job, and so he decides to work in the pickle rooms. The job in the pickle rooms may not be ideal, especially as we learn what the pickle room does to Antanas, but nevertheless, jobs are hard to find. And in his case, he actually has to pay part of his salary to someone who gets him the job. And this is referred to as a petty graft. So grafting is a poor form of political corruption, but it also happens on lower levels. So trying to make payments or bribes to get around the legal restrictions or the systematic restrictions, that is also considered part of everyday life. So the irony of graft is that typically it is illegal, but also it's expected. On the lowest levels of getting someone a job to the highest levels of paying off the right official. Jurgis tries to convince his father not to take the job, but as we read, he tried to persuade his father to have nothing to do with the author, but old Antanas had begged until he was worn out, and all his courage was gone. He wanted a job, any sort of job. So the next day he went and found the man who had spoken to him and promised to bring him a third of all he earned. And that same day he was put to work in Durham's cellars. It was a pickle room, where there was never a dry spot to stand upon, and so he had to take nearly the whole first week of his earnings to buy himself some heavy-soled boots. He was a squeegee man. His job was to go about all day, the long-handled mop swabbing up the floor, except that it was damp and dark. It was not an unpleasant job, in the summer at least. But in winter, the job changes. Then there was old Antanas. The winter came, and the place where he worked was a dark, unheated cellar, where you could see your breath all day, where your fingers sometimes tried to freeze. So the old man's cough grew every day worse, until there came a time it hardly ever stopped, and he had become a nuisance about the place. Then, too, a still more dreadful thing happened to him. He worked in a place where his feet were soaked in chemicals, and it was not long before they had eaten through his new boots. So here I want to highlight, things seem like they're going well, they're going good on the onset. Antanas just wants a job to help support his family. This is the only one he can get, but he quickly learns why even that hard-won job is not a healthy one, and is one that eventually does, in fact, kill him. And so we see little things add up. What was once an innocent pickle or a little bit of vinegar now becomes something eating through the soles of the boot. Again, maybe this is a moment to think about, why have little things add up? What sort of storylines, details, symbols help us understand exactly what Sinclair wants us to perceive about Packingtown and take away from this novel? Little things start to matter even more when we consider everyday items. What kind of food do you eat? What kind of clothes do you wear? Can you trust the milk to really be milk? It matters. And then further, thinking about clothes in the cold, they need the clothes to last. There's no opportunity for getting better clothes over time. You need it to be up to quality. But as we see over and over again, everything that looks good, everything that starts out with these great advertisements, become far more questionable as the family consistently has to use them. This also makes me think about issues of quality control even in our own city. Do you have a good winter coat? Where do you get it and how much does it cost? Are we eating good food? Are you in a bit of a food desert? How far is it to the grocery store? These issues are part of our everyday reality, and we confront them readily and understand them as being far more systematic. But in this moment, it wasn't always clear to people. This is not a matter of free will and choice all the time. It's a matter of living inside a system and an environment that may not necessarily support you, but gives you just enough to keep getting by. One of the ultimate moments where we see little things add up involve the house. All the little details, all the little taxes become far more than the family can handle, and they're all hidden away as if you should expect anything to be way more than the advertised price or even the discussed price. There's always a little bit more, and this ultimately becomes the family's downfall in addition to the struggles of trying to keep well and trying to keep jobs and packing down. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and highlight a succinct or smaller passage that I think extends to a larger issue, and that is surrounding the phrase womb trouble. So Ona has her first child and he's healthy in spite of all the work she's going through, in spite of all the troubles the family has. In fact, it seems like this child is going to be the thing that makes the family even stronger, especially when we consider how much that child motivates Jurgis. Nevertheless, Ona's got a lot to worry about going back to work. They kept her place, but she's now under the title of womb trouble. And under that title, it is difficult to convey in words all that this meant to Ona. It seemed such a slight offense, and the punishment was so out of proportion that neither she nor anyone else connected the two. Womb trouble to Ona did not mean a specialist diagnosis, and a course of treatment, and perhaps an operation or two. It meant simply headaches and pains in the back, depression and heart sickness, and neuralgia whenever she had to work in the rain. So the fact that she can't go to the doctor but also seems well enough to go back to work, all this makes her both undesirable as a worker, but nevertheless she especially needs a job because she now has a child. And we might even think about this in our own context today regarding parental leave. How easy is it to get time off of work to take care of children, to take care of one's body after having a child? Womb trouble, although it's mentioned very briefly, could potentially be used to understand more extensively the way gender is contemplated and considered throughout the novel. And then we might relate it back to parental leave or different aspects of the body today that are not recognized by jobs. And again, womb trouble is more extensive than just Ona. The majority of women who worked in packing towns suffered in the same way and from the same cause, so it was not deemed a thing to see the doctor about. Again, because enough people suffer from it, it's not worth seeing the doctor about. Instead, Ona would try patent medicines one after another, as her friends told her something about them. As these all contained alcohol or some other stimulant, she found that they all did her good while she took them, and so she was always chasing the phantom of good health and losing it because she was too poor to continue. So in this moment, I want us to consider, what is the author trying to suggest? What is the phantom of good health, and why does it matter for Ona in this particular situation? So this is an invitation to think further about this passage, further about its details, and maybe how it might relate to other sections of the novel as well. Put differently, why does Sinclair present womb trouble? What does this tell us about gender and the body in Packingtown? And then there's this other moment, related closely to Ona, and her desire to be a good wife, that is, a wife that doesn't have any sort of adulterous interactions, but also because she is married, she is far more respectable because she's not having sex out of wedlock. But then, of course, this leads to a kind of unspoken understanding in Packingtown where women are supposed to be a little bit more vulnerable because of their class, because of their workload, and because they're immigrants. And all this leads Sinclair to make a comparison to chattel slavery. So thinking further about this passage, I invite you to consider emancipation occurs in 1863. Then there's the end of radical Reconstruction, which was an attempt on the part of the government to integrate the slave, or the freeman, I should say, the black freeman, into American society as citizens, that ended in 1877, beginning what is called the nadir of race relations. So the nadir is the lowest point, a rise in lynching, a rise in race riots, and then, of course, the rise of Jim Crow. There is an afterlife to slavery that is just as virulent and violent as slavery itself. And in this moment, Sinclair is drawing upon the history of slavery to think about what happens to white women. Why might this be the case? And this is a little bit of guess what the teacher's thinking, because there is a sort of cultural comparison that's being made, and then there's some language that goes along with it. For those of you who are especially interested in responding to this question, you might want to look up white slavery to think about why is slavery being connected back to the prospect of women being abused, assaulted, or brought into sort of a lifestyle of prostitution that they didn't necessarily want. Why are these comparisons being made? So this is my third question for you all to consider. With all these questions, you'll note, as opposed to last time, I'm really encouraging you to look more closely at the text, think about the details and passages, and again, you are more than welcome to use the passages that this particular Welcome to the Week has provided. I look forward to reading your comments and continuing this discussion in class this week. Until then.